the narrative transitions to introduce Saia, the third member of the Byakuren Guild. He stands out as the esteemed leader of the White Lotus Guild, recognized among the elite S-class warriors for his remarkable swordsmanship. His striking appearance and amiable personality have made him particularly popular with the women in the city. While he brings joy to the White Lotus Guild, only his closest associates are aware of his dark and sadistic nature. Beneath his charming exterior lies a twisted personality. He takes pleasure in tormenting young women and often tells Manori that she is his favorite target. Unlike the others, Manori has survived his brutal torture, which only amplifies his delight as he revels in her screams. This torment unfolds before Makoto, who is heartbroken over his sister's suffering and eventually confronts Saia, asking why he doesn't torture him instead. In response, Saia silences Makoto with a strike of his sword, explaining that inflicting pain on men offers him no satisfaction. His true pleasure comes from tormenting women. He then resumes torturing Manori, demanding louder screams while Makoto helplessly cries out in despair. The scene shifts again to Saia, who hums cheerfully as he walks through the halls of the Byakuren Guild. He soon spots Haruto and Taro heading toward a restricted area, piquing his curiosity. Saia secretly follows them to discover what lies within. Just as Taro is about to investigate, Haruto senses Saia's presence and confronts him, reminding him that spying is inappropriate. Saia brushes it off with a laugh, apologizing and explaining that he was simply intrigued. Haruto, unbothered by Saia's presence, decides to show him the contents of the room, stating they plan to dispose of them anyway. Upon entering, Saia is taken aback by the sight of numerous large tubes containing human bodies. Taro reveals these are cloned replicas of Manori, created at Haruto's request. Saia learns that mass-producing these clones could help gather experience points efficiently. Haruto elaborates that while they used resources from the White Lotus Guild and Taro's technology to create the clones, the results were disappointing. The clones' regeneration ability faltered after about 10 deaths, yielding no experience points. Taro mentions that attempts to enhance the production process proved too complex, leading them to conclude the experiment was no longer viable. Saia asks if they plan to discard the clones, and Taro confirms, noting they can still be used one last time. He emphasizes they will fully utilize them before disposal, reiterating that nothing compares to the original. At that moment, Saia requests Taro to give him the clones if he has no further interest in them. Taro agrees but clarifies that they are worthless, lacking emotions and willpower. He describes them as defective toys that mindlessly obey orders, devoid of consciousness or feelings. Saia, however, responds with enthusiasm, explaining that this makes them perfect for him. Taro is puzzled by Saia's odd excitement over these mere toys, but Saia insists that Taro simply doesn't understand. Approaching one of the tubes, he admits that he usually dislikes playing with toys, yet this one intrigues him. He relishes the freedom to torture, kill, resurrect, or dispose of them at will, satisfying all his depraved desires. Saia declares that their lives, existence, and everything about them now belong solely to him, under his complete control. Haruto admires Saia's obsession, calling him the worst person he's ever known. The scene shifts back to Makoto, Manori, and a girl revealed to be one of Manori's clones. Manori is distraught, crying upon learning about the other clones. Makoto gently asks if she's okay, and she reassures him, thanking him for his concern. He then inquires about clone number 10 and the others, wondering if they are under Saia's control. She admits she isn't sure how many there are but knows at least 12 are being horrifically exploited by Saia. Makoto explains that he's heard the clones lack emotions or free will, yet she seems different, prompting him to ask why. She confesses that she doesn't know either, but one day, seeing Saia's picture on the news stirred a strange feeling within her, hatred and disgust. Realizing she had experienced human emotions, she confesses that this prompted her escape from Saia's mansion, breaking down in tears. She pleads for their help, stating that while she managed to flee, many others like her remain imprisoned. Makoto starts to think and suggests they could use the clones to eliminate Saia, leading Manori to ask for clarification. He explains that Saia is unaware the clones have emotions, making him careless around them, a potential opportunity. Manori anxiously questions what would happen to the girls if Saia discovers their plan. Makoto bluntly replies they would likely be killed but adds casually that they are just clones. Outraged, Manori slaps him, reminding him that these girls never chose to exist. She collapses in tears, pleading with him not to exploit them and let them die. Embracing clone number 10, she declares that these clones were made from her own cells, making them her younger sisters. She then asks Makoto if he would abandon his sisters if they begged for his help. Makoto argues that these clones could assist them in infiltrating Saia's mansion, providing a rare chance for revenge. However, Manori firmly insists that sacrificing others for revenge would make him no different from the monsters they oppose. Shaken by her words, Makoto assures her that isn't his intent. Standing resolutely beside clone number 10, Manori declares they will rescue the girls. As for the cruel man who harmed her sisters, she vows to kill him herself. Makoto finally agrees, promising they will save the girls together. He apologizes to clone number 10 for frightening her and reassures her they will all be safe now, vowing to rescue everyone. Makoto and Manori then set out on their mission to save the clones and end Saia's reign of terror. The scene shifts back to Saia's mansion, depicted as a grand palace. Saia angrily lashes out at Minori's clones, demanding to know how a clone without will or consciousness could escape so easily. He questions why none of them stopped her and orders them to leave immediately, commanding them to return only after capturing the runaway clone, prompting them to obediently head out to fulfill his orders. Next, the scene shifts to the city streets, where the clones sent to capture the runaway successfully find her. After several attempts to evade them while navigating the crowded streets, they eventually corner and seize her. One clone informs the others that they've apprehended her and are heading back to Saia's mansion immediately. Meanwhile, Makoto and clone number 10 are observing from a nearby rooftop. It becomes clear that the girl with Makoto is actually clone number 10. He reassures her that this was anticipated since Saia had dispatched the clones to locate Manori. Thus, we realize that the captured girl is the real Manori. Clone number 10 anxiously asks Makoto if his sister will be alright. He confidently reassures her, stating that he knows Manori well and that she is not easily defeated. He urges clone number 10 to quickly follow him, and they set off together. Before long, Makoto and clone number 10 arrive at Saia's residence. Makoto remarks on the unexpected enormity of Saia's home, which resembles a grand palace. Clone number 10 explains that her role, along with the other clones, is to serve Saia within these walls. A brief flashback reveals when Makoto and Manori devised their plan. Manori is seen drawing clone number 10's mark on her face. Makoto enters, handing Manori an item from a bag. When she inquires about its contents, he reveals it's his ear. Confused, Manori listens as Makoto clarifies that he will use his body manipulation ability as before, allowing him to hear everything that occurs inside the mansion and intervene promptly if she is in danger. Back in Saia's palace, the clones return with Manori, whom they believe to be clone number 10. Saia angrily confronts her, demanding to know how she dared to defy him and why she escaped from the mansion. Manori, pretending to be clone number 10, apologizes and claims she noticed intruders outside and went after them. She insists that she has already dealt with the situation, but Saia shouts at her, warning that if she behaves that way again without permission, she will be disposed of immediately. Sensing something amiss, Saia receives a sudden call from Haruto, prompting him to leave the girls temporarily while instructing them to complete their assigned tasks by the time he finishes. After he exits, Manori rises and, along with another clone, begins to carry out their duties. During this time, Makoto listens intently, troubled by Saia's remarks about disposing of any disobedient clone. Manori then reaches a room filled with numerous clone corpses stacked atop one another. Meanwhile, other clones are cleaning and disposing of the bodies discarded by Saia. Horrified and distressed by the gruesome scene, Manori urgently tells the clone beside her that they must escape before Saia returns. The clone innocently questions why they need to flee, reminding her that their duty is to serve Master Saia. Manori angrily addresses all the clones, demanding to know if they understand what is truly happening to them. The clones simply respond that they are just disposing of corpses and question if they are doing anything wrong. Minori's frustration deepens as she passionately insists that they cannot possibly be happy in their current situation. The clones inquire about the meaning of happiness, and one clone coldly reminds Manori that they are merely servants and slaves to Master Saia. She continues, explaining that they do not need wills or personalities, they exist solely to obey orders, offer themselves, and accept punishment as required. The clone concludes by declaring that their entire existence belongs to Saia, who has every right to use them as he pleases, as they are nothing more than objects. Meanwhile, Makoto listens intently, filled with rage and frustration. Manori desperately tries to convince the clones that their situation is entirely wrong, but they insist that it is right. This prompts Manori to scream that everything happening is unjust. She rushes toward one of the clones, tightly embracing her, stating that she knows herself better than anyone and understands the pain and torment they've endured. She is certain they cannot bear such suffering. The clone demands Manori let go, but Manori holds on even tighter, loudly declaring to the other clones that their claims about lacking personality or free will are lies, and that their true issue is their inability to express their real feelings and desires. She promises that they will be rescued, but the clone replies that she cannot comprehend anything Manori is saying. Suddenly, Saia enters the room, harshly asking Manori who allowed her to speak without his permission. All the clones immediately bow apologetically, except for Manori, who defiantly stands her ground. Furious, Saia slaps her, accusing her of rebellion and deeming her defective, necessitating immediate disposal. This moment triggers painful memories of past torture inflicted on Manori by Saia in his dungeon. Overwhelmed by these agonizing recollections and the recent slap, Manori temporarily forgets her role as a clone, glaring at Saia with fury and defiance. Provoked by her bold gaze, Saia draws his sword to kill her, but another clone suddenly pleads for him to stop and spare Manori. Enraged further, Saia turns to strike that clone, reprimanding her for daring to give him orders. He screams at all of them, declaring them useless and promising to kill them all. As Saia attacks the clone, Manori swiftly leaps in front to protect her, taking the blow herself. Saia is stunned by a clone sacrificing herself for another, despite believing that clones supposedly lack emotions or free will. In that instant, Manori hurls a small hidden arrow at him, which he effortlessly catches. Saia attacks again, confidently asserting that she must be the real Manori and eagerly asking if she is indeed Makoto's sister, clearly pleased by the revelation. Meanwhile, Makoto, overhearing everything, realizes that Minori's cover has been blown and urgently informs clone number 10 of the situation. He quickly jumps over the palace walls, racing at full speed to save Manori before she is harmed. As Makoto enters the palace, alarms blare throughout, alerting Saia, who mockingly asks Manori if her brother has come to rescue her. Laughing dismissively, Saia assures her that it doesn't matter, as Makoto will accomplish nothing. Weakly, Manori asked Saia what he meant by that. He clarified that the mansion was filled with clones, all exceptionally trained fighters. Leaning closer, he sarcastically remarked that soon, Makoto would see just how long he could survive against them. Indeed, Makoto soon found himself engaged in a fierce battle against numerous clones armed with various weapons. Despite his efforts to evade their attacks and avoid harming them, he suffered a severe injury when one clone struck his shoulder with a large axe, severing his hand. In that moment, clone number 10 rushed in, tackling one of the clones and knocking her down. She stood protectively in front of Makoto, prompting another clone to ask what she was doing. Clone number 10 defiantly declared that Makoto was her older brother. However, the surrounding clones coldly stated that it didn't matter, as Master Saia had ordered the elimination of all intruders. They emphasized that their familial connection changed nothing, branding clone number 10 as an enemy who must also be eliminated. Shocked by their reaction, clone number 10 attempted to defend Makoto once more, but he stopped her from speaking. Makoto then declared that as her older brother, he would handle this himself. He pulled out his mask and put it on, preparing to confront the clones head-on. Meanwhile, Manori was enduring brutal beatings and torture at the hands of Saia, who seemed thoroughly delighted by her suffering. He dragged her by her hair, laughing loudly and mockingly proclaiming that this was the true difference between toys without emotions and the real thing. He forcefully threw her against the wall, causing her to collapse on the ground as she screamed hysterically, blaming her and her brother for Taro's death and for the loss of their once gained power. He angrily expressed how miserable the past few days had been because of them and demanded to know why she had returned after successfully escaping. Approaching her again, he harshly grabbed her arm, sarcastically remarking that it was impossible she had come back just to become his pet again. But Manori shouted back that he was the one who had brutally tortured her and many other girls. Pulling out another hidden weapon, she declared that she would never forgive him. Saia mockingly realized she had come seeking revenge against the man who had previously tortured her. He then seized one of the clones by the hair and told Manori that she was misguided in trying to rescue what he called worthless dolls. He immediately sliced off the clone's head in front of her, coldly reminding Manori that he knew exactly how cruel this act was to her, prompting her to scream in anguish and grief over the loss. This merciless act drove Manori to launch an attack on Saia, but he effortlessly dodged her strike, mockingly asking if she truly believed she could harm an expert warrior like him with her weak abilities. Saia then swiftly severed Minori's arms with his sword, kicking her violently backward and telling her he would teach her a valuable lesson. He emphasized that the dolls weren't alive in the first place, striking down another clone and killing it, asserting that he alone could decide whether to play with or destroy them. Despite the brutality, Manori crawled desperately to embrace the fallen clone, glaring up at Saia with fierce defiance. This prompted him to comment that he never expected her to stare at him with such bold rebellion. Saia charged at her again, declaring he would turn her defiant gaze into despair and submission, slicing off the hand she used to shield the clone. At that moment, Manori began activating her strength enhancement magic. Before Saia could strike another clone, she commanded him sharply to stop, but he ignored her demand, turning his sword toward another clone and asking sarcastically if she truly understood her situation. Without hesitation, he killed the clone before him, coldly reminding Manori that those she desperately wanted to save were nearly worthless dolls. He mocked her persistent yet futile efforts to save them, suggesting she should have politely asked him instead. Saia then demanded that Manori kneel before him, but she refused. He mockingly asked if she really didn't want to save the clones. Lifting the corpse of the dead clone on his sword, he repeated his demand, ordering her to kneel and apologize if she wished to spare them. When Manori refused again, he threw several small knives into another clone's body, warning her that her stubbornness would lead to even greater suffering for the remaining clones. Now forced into submission, Manori knelt before him, begging Saia to stop torturing the girls and insisting he had done enough harm already. Saia dropped the clone and pointed his sword directly at Manori, reminding her that the clones were merely his toys, but hinting he might reconsider if she took their place. Suddenly bringing his sword close to her face, he ordered her to lick it. When Manori hesitated, unable to comply immediately, he told her she had no right to refuse. Saia then brutally stabbed her arm with his sword, stating that the only words allowed in his presence were "yes" and "at your service." Reluctantly, Manori obeyed, extending her tongue toward the blade. But Saia swiftly moved his sword, slicing off her tongue. Manori writhed in agonizing pain as Saia laughed maniacally at her suffering. He grotesquely picked up her severed tongue from the ground and consumed it like an animal, his expression twisted with pleasure and satisfaction as he savored the taste. Witnessing Saia's sickening enjoyment of his cruelty, Manori tried to slowly move away from him. But he quickly grabbed her clothing, roughly stating that he would never allow her to escape again. The terror and fear on her face brought him immense satisfaction. He remarked that this exact expression was what he desired, wanting to see even more of it. He then violently tore the clothing of clone number 10 from Minori's body, laughing hysterically as he expressed his desire to see even greater fear in her eyes. Continuing to laugh uncontrollably, Saia declared that she would remain there to serve him forever, fulfilling all his twisted desires. However, at that very moment, as Saia was caught up in his maniacal laughter, Makoto suddenly appeared and delivered a powerful punch directly to Saia's face. Makoto continued his fierce assault, striking blow after blow until Saia fell to the ground. He quickly rushed over to Manori, handing her another set of clone number 10's clothing and apologizing for being late. Manori reassured him, confidently stating that she always knew he would come to save her. Meanwhile, Saia furiously rose from the floor, cursing Makoto and demanding to know what he had done to all the clones in the mansion. Mockingly, he claimed it was impossible that Makoto had killed them all, emphasizing that they resembled his sister. Makoto replied firmly that he hadn't killed any of them, he had only rendered them temporarily immobile. Saia laughed at this, calling Makoto boring and declaring that had he been in Makoto's place, he would have made it much more exciting. He then threatened to capture Makoto, imprison him, and assault Manori repeatedly in front of his eyes. Enraged, Makoto shot back that he had a better idea, he would cut Saia into 1,000,000 pieces. He launched himself at Saia, whose surprise at Makoto's strength forced him to realize how Makoto had managed to defeat all the clones. Makoto delivered a powerful kick that knocked Saia back, but Saia quickly recovered, seizing his sword and preparing for battle. Activating his lightning speed, Saia moved toward Makoto, launching a strike known as Divine Thunder. Stunned by Saia's incredible speed and strength, Makoto suffered a devastating injury as Saia's attack severed his hand, causing Saia to feel victorious. However, he was immediately caught off guard when Makoto's severed hand suddenly flew toward him, delivering a devastating punch. The force of Makoto's blow sent Saia crashing violently into the wall, shattering it. Saia quickly escaped through the newly created hole, with Makoto chasing after him, determined to finish him off for good. Saia ordered the clones to surround him and shield him with their bodies. Makoto mockingly asked if he was now hiding behind the same girls he had mercilessly tortured, calling him truly pathetic. Saia snapped back that the clones were merely his toys to use as he pleased, but Makoto cut him off, asserting that the time for talking was over. Saia commanded the clones to capture Makoto, and they began to gather around him. Hesitant to harm them because they resembled his sister, Makoto struggled to defend himself. Just then, Manori exited the room, anxiously calling out to Makoto, but the clones surrounded her as well. Instead of letting her through, they began violently attacking her, overwhelming her until she could no longer resist. Seeing his sister being brutally assaulted, Makoto desperately tried to reach her, but the clones held him firmly, restraining him as he fought with all his strength. Finally, Makoto managed to stand again, moving determinedly toward Manori despite the relentless attempts to stop him. He reached her, pleading for them not to hurt his sister. At that moment, Saia approached from behind, driving his sword through Makoto's back and piercing the body of the Manori clone directly in front of him. Laughing maniacally, Saia mockingly asked Makoto if this was his beloved sister and sarcastically challenged him to try to protect her now. Makoto looked toward his sister's clone, deeply apologizing for all the pain she had endured because of him. The clone calmly replied that no apology was necessary, as it was simply her duty. Makoto insisted that this wasn't true, she was only following orders and hadn't chosen this for herself. The clone stared at him, confused and unable to grasp his words, while Makoto directed an intense gaze full of anger and defiance toward Saia. Seeing this expression, Saia felt an unprecedented fear and quickly pulled his sword from Makoto's body, anxiously asking what this look meant. He then chased Makoto, repeatedly trying to strike him, but Makoto skillfully evaded every attack. Frustrated, Saia threatened that if Makoto continued dodging, he would kill the clone in front of him. When Saia swung his sword to strike the clone, Makoto swiftly jumped in front of her, taking the blow himself. Saia laughed hysterically, mocking Makoto for his lack of resistance and striking him again while threatening more severe torture for his sister if he resisted further. Manori screamed in pain and fear as she watched Saia brutally torture Makoto, still helplessly restrained by the other clones. Saia then unleashed a devastating move known as the Serpent Slash, mercilessly slicing Makoto's body multiple times and leaving him cut into several pieces. He placed his foot on Makoto's severed head, laughing maniacally and declaring that he would enjoy the sight of what he would soon do to Manori. Yet, as Saia stood victorious, stepping arrogantly on Makoto's head, Makoto's body unexpectedly began regenerating, fully restored. He swiftly knocked Saia's foot aside and rose back to his feet. Shocked by Makoto's rapid recovery, Saia heard him defiantly challenge him, asking what made him think he had defeated them. Saia sarcastically retorted that Makoto was surely doomed and merely pretending to be strong. Ignoring him, Makoto positioned himself protectively before the clones, who watched him in astonishment. Confused, one clone asked why Makoto persisted in protecting them. Smiling gently, he replied that a brother doesn't need a reason to protect his sisters. His words visibly affected the clones, causing them to exchange uncertain, thoughtful glances. Saia mockingly asked about these sisters Makoto mentioned, insisting they were nothing more than toys created by White Lotus technology. He asserted that no matter how hard Makoto tried to protect them, they would always be slaves obedient only to him. He then ordered the clones to kill Makoto, promising that the clone who succeeded would become his favorite. However, all the clones remained motionless, ignoring his order. Furious and outraged, Saia screamed at the clones, asserting that he alone had authority and they had no right to disobey him. Yet, the clones continued to stand silently, unable to respond or decide what to do. At that moment, clone number 10 appeared, addressing the other clones and urging them to understand the situation clearly. Saia flew into a rage upon seeing her speak directly to them, but clone number 10, undeterred, continued, emphasizing that they needed to realize the truth after all the pain and suffering they had experienced in this place. She firmly stated they must recognize who genuinely wanted to protect them, Makoto. She concluded by urging them to understand who their true enemy was. Hearing this, the clones slowly turned their gazes toward Saia, their expressions shifting as understanding began to dawn on them. As they collectively stared, visible anxiety and fear overtook Saia, especially when the girls asked him not to harm their brother. The clones surrounded Saia, weapons aimed at him, leaving Makoto and Manori bewildered by the sudden turn of events. Moments later, the clones began speaking among themselves, explaining that they were genetic copies of the original Manori, making them identical. They revealed that they had started experiencing glimpses of the real Manori's memories in their minds. Within their thoughts, they recalled scenes of everything Makoto had done to protect them, remembering his continuous sacrifices for their safety. Together, they began to speak about Makoto's bravery, his sacrifices, and his repeated willingness to risk his life for them. Initially astonished, Makoto quickly realized that his sister Manori was using her body manipulation ability, similar to how he had once controlled his severed hand and ear. Through this skill, Manori managed to subconsciously share her memories and experiences with the clones, as they were created from her own cells and shared her genetic makeup. Saia, enraged by this development, screamed at the clones, reminding them they were just his toys and had to obey his commands. However, the clones firmly refused, stating they couldn't follow his orders this time. Although they couldn't fully comprehend their emotions, they knew anyone who tried to hurt their brother was their enemy, regardless of who it was. Saia's fury escalated, and he threatened to tear them apart with his sword, but Makoto stepped forward defiantly, asking if Saia truly thought he would allow that. He attacked swiftly, knocking Saia's sword from his grasp. As Saia reached for it, one clone pierced his hand with her spear, preventing him from grabbing the weapon. Another clone immediately pinned his hands firmly to the ground, completely immobilizing him. Makoto stood over Saia, looking down and questioning how he should kill him now. However, Manori approached him, reminding him of his earlier promise to let her kill Saia herself. She explained that unless she personally ended his life, she would never find peace or satisfaction. With determination, Manori stepped closer, wielding a huge hammer. Saia begged desperately, screaming for her not to strike him in that specific spot. Yet filled with rage over the torture she had endured, Manori smashed him viciously right where he feared most. Saia cried out and wept in agony, but Manori continued striking him repeatedly, raising her hammer again and declaring she would hit him until he could no longer scream. Suddenly, clone number 10 interrupted, requesting a moment to speak. She reminded Manori that they too had suffered tremendously under Saia's cruelty, emphasizing that it wasn't just them, dozens of others had been tortured, suffered, and killed by Saia as well. Manori responded firmly, stating that this was precisely why she insisted Saia experience the same pain. Clone number 10 countered, clarifying that she didn't merely want Saia to experience their pain, she wanted him to suffer far worse than anything he had ever inflicted on others. Makoto intervened, telling clone number 10 that he understood her feelings, but the experiences they had endured were already enough. The clones passionately interrupted him, recounting how they had repeatedly been killed and humiliated, with another clone adding that they had lived through absolute hell. One clone then informed Makoto that in the palace basement, a strange creature had been imprisoned in a cell for a very long time. She explained that this creature was constantly drugged using special Bjorn techniques, making it uncontrollably violent and aggressive toward anything moving in front of it. Makoto asked whether this creature attacked even human males, to which the clone firmly replied that it did. She added that a hunter once challenged Saia, who had responded by forcing the creature to brutally attack him. Hearing this, Makoto turned to Manori for her opinion. She immediately agreed, expressing her readiness to do whatever was necessary to exact revenge on Saia. The two siblings, accompanied by the clones, then proceeded toward the creature's location. The scene shifted to show Saia chained and locked inside a cell in the basement of his own palace. Makoto, Manori, clone number 10, and another clone stood outside the cell, calmly observing Saia as he screamed hysterically, pleading to be released. A special device for opening and closing cells was activated, announcing that the cell was now open. It became clear that the unlocked cell belonged to the strange creature previously described by the clone. Saia became terrified upon seeing that the creature's cell opened directly onto his own, screaming for them not to release this particular monster and desperately claiming he would endure any form of torture except this. At that moment, they learned the creature's name, Emperor Orc, albeit a modified version. Makoto remarked that he had heard of the Emperor Orc before, recalling that just one of these creatures could mate with an entire population. The clone clarified that normally, this creature only mated with females of its own kind, but the Bjorn laboratories had used advanced technology combined with special drugs to enable it to mate with anything, regardless of species. Unable to handle the scene unfolding before her, Manori turned away, prompting Makoto to instruct the clone to stop watching. Manori then asked the clone to lower the curtain slightly between them and the cell, but she still witnessed the deformed creature exacting its brutal revenge on Saia. Saia's screams and torture continued for a long time. Eventually, an exhausted Manori sat on the floor while Makoto leaned against the wall, worn out. Clone number 10 anxiously asked if they were both alright. Makoto assured her he was fine but extremely tired and needed some rest. Manori similarly confirmed her need to rest. Briefly, the clone prepared tea, and the three of them sat to recuperate. Clone number 10 expressed her gratitude, thanking them sincerely for allowing the clones their brutal revenge against Saia. Makoto calmly responded that he had intended to kill Saia eventually anyway. However, clone number 10 gently reminded him that he had chosen not to kill anyone, resulting in no deaths occurring since the battle began. She continued, saying she was unable to sufficiently express her gratitude for everything he had done for them. Genuinely thankful, Makoto told her that no thanks were needed and then asked clone number 10 to accompany him to show him around the rest of the palace. He explained that they needed to gather food and equipment as well as collect information on the Bjorn. Clone number 10 agreed but said she would stay behind to watch the area, instructing clone number 3 to accompany Makoto. As they walked together, Makoto asked number 3 what the clones planned to do next. She replied uncertainly that she didn't know, sadly adding that they never chose to be created and that possibly no one in this world would accept them. Makoto firmly told her that wasn't true, even if the whole world rejected them, he and Manori would always accept them, regardless of their origin or future choices. He assured her they had every right to live however they wished. Number 3 felt great joy hearing these comforting words and happily agreed with him. When they finally reached their destination, Number 3 opened the door cheerfully, telling Makoto she was determined to live her life as fully as possible. But suddenly, as she smiled hopefully at Makoto, he was horrified to see her head abruptly severed right before his eyes. Makoto was profoundly shocked by the suddenness of this tragic event, desperately calling her name and unable to comprehend what was happening. He was even more stunned upon seeing who was responsible for the attack, sorrowfully questioning their presence and motive for such cruelty. The attacker stepped forward, revealed to be Haruto, who calmly remarked that it had been a long time since they last met. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button for more content. Feel free to leave a comment down below sharing your thoughts or suggestions. If you want to stay updated on our latest uploads, click the notification bell icon. And hey, why not check out some of our other videos popping up on the screen right now? If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by liking, sharing, and subscribing. It really means a lot. Peace.